It's morning here at Stanford Business School and Stanford University. So I want to say good morning to you. Even though I know some of you are probably in locations where it's afternoon, evening, or maybe late at night. So thanks for joining us for this opportunity to talk a little bit about the Stanford MSx program. And particularly from the point of view of someone who is interested in the field of entrepreneurship and considering launching your own venture. So I am going to get started here and share just a little bit of background about some of the resources available for entrepreneurs in the Stanford MSx program. We'll be joined, looks like we're joined by one, we'll be joined by a few other alumni of the program that have been pursuing entrepreneurial ventures, and hear a little bit from them. And that's really probably the most valuable aspect of this, is to hear firsthand from a few people that have been in the entrepreneurial space after completing the Stanford MSx program, and get some perspectives on how the program either assisted them or prepared them effectively for some of the challenges of being an entrepreneur. So I'll just take a few minutes and speak a little bit about the program holistically. And want to provide a little bit of perspective. I know people will be joining us over the next couple of minutes as well, so give them a chance to join before we start the panel discussion. So in the Stanford MSx program, what we typically see is most of our students fall into one of three categories, not necessarily cleanly in one category. Some are thinking about different options for themselves after they complete the program. But we have students that are in the program looking to primarily prepare themselves to go back into the field from where they came, within their companies or in their industries. And let me just pause here. And David, Mark, Robbie, thanks for joining us. You can just stay off camera and mute yourself for a few minutes. I'll call you in a few minutes, but thanks for being with us today. So amongst our students, we have some that are, preparing to jump back into their, respective organizations or fields from where they came. We refer to those generally as career accelerators. So think about someone who's essentially, maybe they've already gone to graduate school, maybe they've gotten a, advanced degree in mechanical engineering, or, maybe they've already got a medical degree. One of our panelists today has a medical degree. And they work in organizations, primarily starting with the technical expertise, but over time they find themselves more and more dealing with managerial and leadership issues, and they want an opportunity to get the formal business education that they didn't, maybe choose to get earlier in their career. And so the Stanford MSx program is an accelerated degree program, is a good option for them. Second, we have people that are looking to pivot, from one industry to another, maybe one geography to another. There's so much disruptive change that happens in, a variety of industries over a period of a decade or two, that a lot of people feel that, 15 years maybe after they graduated from school, they need some supplemental education or opportunity to, broaden their thinking from a management perspective, and also maybe drill down into some domain expertise. And coming to a place like Stanford for a year can be a great opportunity there. And last, we have people that are really interested in something a little bit more entrepreneurial. And what we find is, people that are considering an entrepreneurial pathway probably make up about 25 to 30% of our intake. So people coming into the program this year, we actually asked everybody coming into the program, which of these three pathways do you see yourself primarily focusing on? And 30% said, entrepreneurship was their primary interest. And yet over, some of our recent classes, we looked at what percent right after graduation jump into an entrepreneurial venture where they are establishing a new enterprise, what we found was about 17% is what that represented. Now we did not include people who said they were starting a company, on graduation day, and 3 months later were working for, an established company. We looked at people that said, I'm starting a company, and a year after graduation, they still said, yeah, that's what I'm doing. So this is, there's sometimes right at graduation, people are kind of in flux. They haven't figured out exactly where they're going to land. They're exploring a couple opportunities, one of which may be something entrepreneurial, but they may not end up pursuing that. So this is, we see fluctuation from year to year, somewhere between 15 and low 20 to 25% that pursue something entrepreneurial. But as a 3-year average, this is, I think, fairly representative of what we typically see in a year in terms of people that, focus on that and then stay with that for the entire first year after they graduate. One thing I would also just note is that, we also see a lot more fluctuation in terms of salary or income compensation right after graduation. So we looked at this same 3-year period, and what we found was that on average amongst our graduates, graduates saw about a 31% increase in total compensation, in their post MSx role. Compared to what they had before the program. 20% of our graduates saw a decrease in compensation in their post program, but a big portion of that was the entrepreneurs. So people that were doing an entrepreneurial venture, 38% reported showing a decrease in compensation relative to what they were doing before. So this is one of the challenges of being an entrepreneur. It's something you have to be very cognizant of. It's a high risk, potentially high reward, opportunity or general pathway to pursue. And so, it's not surprising that about 30% of our students coming into the program say, yeah, I'm interested, I'm going to explore entrepreneurship. But at graduation, less than that are really ready to jump into something entrepreneurial. And we may hear from some of our panelists some of the reasons for that. Some of them did not start an entrepreneurial venture right at graduation, but, it was a few years later that they began to pursue something entrepreneurial. And we see that regularly amongst our graduates when we do polls at about 5 years after graduation. We typically see that close to 50% say that at some point in that 5 years they were part of an entrepreneurial venture. So it's something that a lot of our graduates do, not necessarily immediately after graduation. Sometimes it takes a few years before they launch. I want to just mention a few things that may come up in our discussion and provide a little context about options at the business school. Startup Garage is a class that is offered and is really, I would say, considered almost one of the core classes in the entrepreneurship sort of domain. Technically, it's an elective. No one has to take it, and fewer than 50% of our students take it. But it is widely used class to really give people an experiential opportunity to develop some skills and awareness and sort of facility with entrepreneurial thinking and skills. So essentially, you join a team, you have a business challenge that you're making your focus as an area of exploration to consider entrepreneurial opportunities. And over the course of the first phase of the course, you determine if you can identify a business opportunity based on that market challenge. So can we come up with solutions we think we could turn into a business and generate enough revenue or income to make that a worthwhile business? Realize the value of what we're doing. And then if that answer to that question is yes, you pursue essentially a second phase of the class, which is really trying to develop that into a business plan and be able to, at the end of the class, make appeals to potential investors, identify what you need in terms of a team or other access to resources that would enable you to actually start that business. And, many companies have come out of this course or its predecessor, including, SoFi, DoorDash, even Nike, back in a prior iteration of this class was, essentially a business plan that came out of Phil Knight's time taking a course at Stanford. There was an entrepreneurial experiential course. Now there's a lot of different courses available, and let me see if this works here. If I can click on this, I'm hoping you can see my screen here, just to give kind of a picture of the list of courses available at the Graduate School of Business, and really this is across Stanford, but available to students in the MSx program. The options are so extensive; they're far beyond what anyone can cover in 1 year. But it gives you, a sense of the depth of available courses and faculty. This is spread out across not only the business school, but other schools at Stanford, and allows you to really think about entrepreneurship, in a very, very deep way, and go deep. Am I ever going to get to the end here? Yeah, there we go. So let me see here. Jump back in. Lots of courses available. No shortage of opportunities to study different courses. And beyond courses, there's also a lot of resources that are available. So we have the Center for Entrepreneurial Studies, that's a CES, at Stanford Graduate School of Business, and the Stanford Venture Studio, which is so the CES is essentially a hub, staff and faculty-led center within the school that really looks at entrepreneurship and in a very holistic way, supports courses like Startup Garage and many others, connects us with our alumni around the opportunities around entrepreneurship and so on. And the Venture Studio is actually a physical space where we create a hub where, anybody that's working on a potential venture, thinking about developing a business, or actively working on something that they hope after they graduate they can launch as an enterprise, can actually, set up physical space, have a place where their team can hold meetings, and is also a hub in a physical sense where we'll hold regular workshops, and other students that are working on entrepreneurial ideas are gathered so people can, share tips about common challenges, nuts and bolts of term sheets, or, approaching investors, or, different VC funds you might be interested in, or, other questions, legal questions that you may have. We have a number of centers and institutes across Stanford, probably too many for me to, cover in much detail. There's a number of student clubs that are entrepreneurial focused, specific to a particular domain. We also have an entrepreneurs club at the business school that's just a general club for students interested in entrepreneurship. And around Stanford, there's a lot of ventures that are, focused on supporting students and alumni in entrepreneurial ventures. So StartX is an actual incubator, a fund at Stanford that many graduating students, not just graduate, but some undergraduate, go into to launch a venture after they graduate. Stanford Ventures is also a fund to support such efforts. OTL is the Office of Technology and Licensing, which essentially takes and converts IP that is developed through research at Stanford. Much of it is medical or health related, and licenses that to allow people to launch it as a business. And the alumni network is extensive. I do want to just sort of call out a couple alums that have been central in the broader Stanford ecosystem. Sid Singh was the COO for a number of years at StartX. He's now running his own company, but anytime I have questions, or many alums have questions and want to connect with the resources available through StartX or its networks, it is a great resource. Stanford Angels and Entrepreneurs is another organization of Stanford alumni that are in the angel and venture community primarily, but entrepreneurs as well. Alan Chu, one of our graduates, was the president of that entity that includes well over 2,000 alumni around the world, across a wide array of industries, for a number of years. And he's CEO of his company now, Boba Networks. He's also a partner at Exceed Capital, another great resource for many of our students and alumni. These are just a few of the sort of examples of our alums that play a critical role in the broader Stanford entrepreneurship ecosystem, very wired in. And last, I just want to say that anybody that's aspiring to be an entrepreneur, you're going to need people around you that are supporters, that are mentors, partners, colleagues, and in some cases, kind of a critical eye that are going to, call your bluff and say, hey, I don't think this is a good idea. I think you're taking on too much risk here, right? And that's one of the things that I think coming into a program like this, joining a cohort that you spend a year with and get to know really, really well, that spans a diverse range of industries, cultural backgrounds, has a wide range of business expertise, can be absolutely invaluable. And we'll probably, hear a bit about that from our panelists today. So with that, I want to, turn and spend less time talking, apart from asking a few questions. Robbie and David and Mark, are you there? Maybe you can turn on your cameras, if you will, and you'll note that I've put you in the classroom again. So for those that may not be familiar with it, this is the backdrop here for our panelists is a GSB classroom, and so we'll hear from them as if they're class speakers today. And hopefully Robbie will sort of jump on, and there we go. Great. Hey, Robbie. Oh, Robbie's the IT specialist here. He probably was able to get his own background. Looks like you're not at the GSB, are you, Robbie?
I am actually.
Oh wow. Okay. So so we have one that's two virtually at the GSB and one that's actually at the GSB. So so I want to ask each of you to introduce yourself, just very briefly. Background before coming to the GSB and what you're doing today, and end that with basically a 1-minute elevator pitch about your current entrepreneurial venture. So maybe we can start with you, Mark, as the senior amongst the group.
Are you saying I'm old? Is that
I'm just saying you graduated earlier. You graduated ahead of everybody.
It's almost kind of a decade now, which is it's exciting. So yeah, my background, I'm originally from the Netherlands. I spent the first part of my career as a management consultant, and then actually built a managed services business for a client of mine, which is kind of my real, I guess, large entrepreneurial experience. And then kind of led corporate strategy, corporate development for Orido Group, which is a kind of emerging markets telecom group. I founded, and I'm the CEO of Deliberate AI. I founded a company back in 2020. Basically what we do, and just let me know, Mike, how much detail you'd like me to provide. But basically we provide a platform.
Like a 1 minute
1 minute pitch. All right.
Yeah.
So let me pitch that actually. So we're a platform for kind of, in technical terms, kind of data-driven multimodal assessment for psychiatric and neurological health. What that basically means is that we use machine learning to more objectively and more accurately assess psychiatric and neurological disorders. And the real problem we're working towards solving is kind of the large degree of subjectivity that's hampering these conditions. So we see issues in primary care where there's a high degree of misdiagnosis, in kind of specialty care where it's hard to track how people are responding to treatment, as well as in clinical trials, which is where we kind of focus our products on. So we help clinical trial companies, or kind of whether it's biopharma or medical device companies, have more effective and more efficient clinical trials by more kind of basically measuring treatment response and kind of distinguishing different subtypes of patients, kind of more accurately using machine learning, using audiovisual, and we're working to include other kind of data types such as genomics and proteomic data as well.
Great. All right. Well, so I'll jump to Robbie, but before I do want to just mention for anybody who's joining us today, feel free to submit some questions in the Q&A or chat. I'll keep an eye on both, but I've got a few questions that I'm going to pose to each of the panelists to kind of get a sense of their experience at Stanford and since, and how they've been supported or areas where they saw opportunities for support, and then I'll open it up and try to answer any questions that have been submitted as well. So feel free to do that in the meantime. Robbie, how about a quick intro and elevator pitch from you?
Yep. Hey guys, I'm Ravi. I graduated in 2017, as it says on the slide there. I started IRA Technologies along with my co-founder in 2019. At IRA, we use a machine learning powered approach to design the baseband stack for 5G networks. And this provides essentially network operators and private 5G companies better capacity and better coverage. That's what we're doing.
Mhm. That's great.
I can add more, Mike, if
Let's we'll come back. I'm sure we'll get
you said
some
1
more.
minute, I'm sticking to 1 minute.
There you go. Yeah. David, how about you?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Mike. My name's David, everyone. My background was in medicine. I was doing cardiac surgery before the MSx. I was probably a frustrated engineer my whole life, though, so that was part of the reason I came. Actually started 2 companies there, and one was bootstrapped and was sold last year. Another one, Remedy Robotics, is focused on expanding access to surgical care around the world. So we basically build the software and hardware to enable people to get treatment for time-critical conditions wherever they are in the world and not have to schlep to specialist centers. So yeah, it's been great.
Great. So, I want to ask each of you, and I'll start with you, Mark. I mean, about this question, and I'll ask others to weigh in because I think there were some very different experiences here. But when you came to the program back in 2012, in your case, how much was entrepreneurship on your mind? Was that sort of a key focus, and how has that evolved over the time since you graduated?
Yeah, so it wasn't per se on my mind, in the sense that one of the reasons for coming to Stanford, actually wanted to be closer to kind of what I consider to be kind of a hubspot of innovation around Silicon Valley. So I wanted to get closer to that. Initially, I was thinking more about pursuing a investment path, either in private equity or maybe in venture capital. So I wanted to be close to that, and I ended up kind of spending some time with a number of early stage companies since, but I wasn't necessarily starting to think about really starting my own company until a little bit later, I guess, in the journey.
Yeah, so we'll come back and ask about essentially support and opportunities that came even after completing the program, and ways that the program and the school and alumni network have supported you along the way. But David or Ravi, I think you, while you were in the program, were a bit more focused on what sorts of opportunities might you want to pursue from an entrepreneurial perspective. You say a little bit about that.
Ravi, well, go, Ravi.
Go ahead, David.
Yeah, no, I didn't know what the word entrepreneurship meant, but I knew I wanted to start a company when I came, and I kind of was pretty deliberate, and a lot of the decisions I made throughout the year were geared towards facilitating that. So spending time in the engineering school, trying to find a co-founder, kind of exposure to venture capital and stuff like that. So yeah, I was pretty deliberate, including skipping a lot of classes in order to kind of get that done.
Mm-hmm.
Great term, deliberate, by the way, David.
Yeah, great term.
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, that sounds very familiar. It was a similar situation for me. My background was deeply technical. I had spent 10 plus years at Qualcomm before coming to GSB. Before that, I had spent some time at Bell Labs. I'd spent some time at Texas Instruments. So came from a very deep technical background and started getting into entrepreneurship actually while I was at Qualcomm. They called it intrapreneurship or kind of idea generation. They had various programs. Really fell in love with the process of kind of taking an idea from 0 to 1. Didn't know anything about entrepreneurship, didn't know what it involved, what it meant to find co-founders, what does it take to, what are the actual mechanics of starting a company. Didn't know anything about it, but just wanted to explore. I was in the right phase of my career where it warranted a 1-year break, and I came in similar to David with the idea of trying to pursue something, and yeah, very quickly met several other people who had a similar ideas of coming to GSB for that very purpose, and it was very easy to start having discussions around it.
Mm-hmm. So, and it sounds like, tell me if I misconstrue this in any way, but, Robbie and Mark, you had some experience coming in, not necessarily as a, entrepreneur, founder of your own thing, but, through the businesses that you were a part of before coming into the program, you had some entrepreneurial-like experiences, but not, something where you actually launched your own venture. And David, you were coming from a medical background where you really just didn't have anything like that. You were just, kind of focused on your field of specialty. And so what I ask, and maybe I'll start with you, Robbie, is what's how did your experience at the GSB enable you or support you in being able to start your venture? And this venture, I know you didn't start immediately, but let's say either this or your first venture.
No.
Yeah.
I did start this venture immediately. So I found a co-founder at Stanford. I was able to do this thing called low-key notes at Stanford, and one of my investors was sitting in the crowd. So that's how I raised my first check. I wanted to do the MSx because I knew it would give me kind of hardcore rapid fire exposure to business fundamentals quickly in a highly concentrated fashion. So that was super, super useful for me. So basically with that, I probably had the hubris, or was dumb enough to say, like, I've got a co-founder, I've got a check, I've got 3 months of business fundamentals, let's go. And so, yeah.
And just as a context, Low Key Notes is a program that we have at the GSB that's a bit like a TED Talks format, where essentially students are developing a talk that they're going to be able to give, in both live and virtual formats. And so a lot of people that are pursuing entrepreneurial ventures use that as a way to, go out and develop their elevator pitch, their, rationale for why they're doing what they're doing. And it can be quite beneficial to help them communicate more effectively and also reach, a fairly broad audience through that effort. So thanks for that, David. How about you, Robbie?
Yeah, so came in similar to David and others, knowing nothing about entrepreneurship. I got into tech venture formation. This is a course out at MSNE department. Like you mentioned, there are courses all over Stanford for entrepreneurship. So the one I took was from MSNE. I had a couple of my team members were from engineering. One of my team members was from my MSx class. And that was kind of my first experience going through what does it take to start a company? What are the different facets of it? I only thought, okay, all it takes is an idea and money, but no, there's much more to it. There's a crafting a pitch, crafting your thesis, and kind of diligently verifying if this is a good thesis or not. So the actual mechanics of it was taught totally at GSB, and GSB also makes it real. There's you see other people actually starting companies left and right of you, so that this is not just a course, just not something that you take and finish and you write a presentation at the end of it and you're done. It makes it very real, and you see it happening all around you, so it gives you a lot of motivation to do it.
Great. And how about you, Mark? You didn't go into entrepreneurship right away. So how did you spend much time taking entrepreneurial courses while you were in the program?
I did, and I think to your point about like the what how did the experience at the GSB really enable it? I think I would say there are three things for me. So two are around like really the classes. So better understanding the financial side of what it actually takes, whether it on the investment side or it is an entrepreneurship side, like what are the terms that are typical in term sheets, for instance, right? I had very little exposure to that beforehand. So there are a lot of great classes that help you understand the financial and legal elements around that. So that's one thing I took away. The second thing from that is around communications, or the other things, well, how do you pitch your ideas, right? So it's not just a matter of having an idea, but how do you actually kind of convince and kind of sell this to other people. And the third point, I guess, kind of connecting to what Ravi said, is one of the things that is kind of beyond just only the things you get in classes, is this kind of culture around, there's so much entrepreneurship across the GSB. So in my year, for instance, like DoorDash was kind of launched, which I remember still at the time thinking like, wow, that doesn't sound like a great idea, but it did turn out to be $1 billion company. So kind of there are two elements to that. Kind of, there's an element of humbleness that it creates to think, hey, actually, kind of great ideas can come from multiple things. And to Ravi's point as well, kind of it also builds a sense of confidence to say like, hey, I know these guys, like they're great, but actually kind of with a good team, I'm sure I can make a difference as an entrepreneur as well. So both the class, the structured thing, as well as kind of the climate that the GSB builds, I think are really conducive to good entrepreneurship.
Great. So, you know, the next question I was going to ask is you know, very similar to two questions that have been posted in the Q&A here. Really asking about the support you've gotten in terms of your own venture from the GSB or the GSB community. So thinking about your own, you know, sort of current venture, and I'll start with you, Ravi. You know, how do you feel that the GSB has been supportive? You know, were there Stanford alumni connections? Was there support in getting funding, or you know, identifying partners? What sorts of resources have you tapped into as you've you know, been pursuing this venture?
Yeah, absolutely. Right as I was graduating, one of our business school ideas that we had started at Tech Venture Formation actually was the company that we started pursuing. It was called Acuity AI. This was a company that I had started before IRA Technologies, and we got into an accelerator called Alchemist. The way we knew about that accelerator was because one of our other team that were part of Tech Venture Formation were also getting into it. So there was that kind of information sharing that happens, and we got into Alchemist, and it was like a boot camp about all the different aspects of entrepreneurship there. We got some initial funding from there. We got funding from professors that I knew at Stanford. They ended up being they ended up writing some angel checks into the company. And then it keeps going. Even recently, like a month ago, I was meeting Steve Blank to get ideas about how to think about IRA from a government context. And even right now, I'm meeting one of the investors at Town and Country. I came to know about this person and what they are doing from one of the Google groups that I'm part of that came out of MSx and GSB. So it started off with a lot of help, but then it just keeps going. It's all a question of how much you are able to tap into it.
Yeah, and I'll sort of ask David to comment on this as well, and Mark. But I did see a question about, you know, the majority of co-founder pairings, are they happening between GSB students or between, you know, GSB students and other students? And it sounds like, I mean, if you took Tech Venture Formations, that's a class that's actually at the School of Engineering. So I'm guessing that your co-founders were not necessarily GSB. Is that correct, Ravi?
Yeah, one of my co-founders was Tech, and one of my co-founders was from MSx. So
Yeah,
there were three of us.
Yeah, that's right. So, and how about you, David? When you were sort of launching this, were you working? You were working with people outside the GSB, I think, right?
Yes, only room for one GSB in the room, Mike.
Right. And Mark, how about you? When you launched your venture, and this was a few years after graduating, were there Stanford alums involved, or was it sort of separate from Stanford at that point? And how did your sort of Stanford connections support your effort at that point?
Yeah, no. So I would say they've been really instrumental on a number of things. So actually, one of my classmates who turned into becoming a full-time investor was one of our earliest backers. Our first kind of institutional investor is a firm set up by a former GSB alum and kind of her partner, kind of Stanford PhD, which is one of the most successful kind of seed investment firms in the Valley now. So actually, the fact of having those connections makes two things much easier. First of all, the introductions, and secondly, also doing due diligence, both from them on me as a founder, as well as like, hey, what is it actually to work with these investors? And also we're a StartX company, so having entry to kind of that kind of community of entrepreneurship that is kind of set up by Stanford has also been kind of really great to kind of connect and learn some of the things from other entrepreneurs. And finally, I think kind of it's just so amazing to see like how willing the Stanford community is to respond to alumni, kind of, and I'd like to pay that forward as well. And that has, for us, made it much easier to get introductions to venture capital firms, for instance, because there's always at least one GSBer with one of those firms, and then kind of faculty. Like, so we are a highly technical kind of domain, and so we try to reach out to a lot of experts, and kind of the helpfulness is pretty impressive. Yeah.
Can I just add to what Mark said, Mike? I was very nervous about leaving my career that I'd spent 8 years doing, and speaking to you and Alison at the time, and the time you took to kind of help us through that was very, very helpful. I may not have otherwise had the courage to do that, and so I think that kind of sounds like a soft thing, but it was very important to me at the time, because otherwise I have just gone back to what I was doing.
Yeah, well, I remember your low keynote talk, and it was very very moving, very effective. So I'm not surprised that someone else in the audience that had more money than I did was you know, interested in supporting it. What else, David, did you find you know, as you were launching your venture? What other ways were you plugged into Stanford, you know, on team building, you know, funding, or other sort of initial steps?
Yeah, I mean, I hate this, but it's a lot easier to get intros to VCs through a Stanford connection. Not exactly fair, but that's the way it is. They were kind of presented on a platter in a way, which was brilliant. And then I think, I mean, for me, I've said before, but I was looking for a technical co-founder, and the Stanford School of Medicine was also super useful. So I would say just the exposure to capital and the exposure to advice, and plus the technical resources are kind of, you can't beat it.
Right. And then, you know, what advice would you have? One of the questions that someone posed was, you know, how helpful is the MSx when you have entrepreneurship as a long-term career objective? You know, not just a sort of short-term, I want to launch a company, how am I going to get this sort of off the ground? But, you know, I would sort of pair that with, what advice do you have for someone who's kind of an aspiring entrepreneur considering the program today, how to think about, you know, it as a longer term opportunity? Why don't we start with Mark? We'll start with you, and then. Yeah.
So I think some questions already came up around like co-founders, things like, there's something truly unique, I guess, about being in the GSB and being able to kind of connect both with other people at the GSB, as well as kind of people across the street, to just use the colloquial term, in other departments. So I think there's this truly unique opportunity, which is not only immediate, but also kind of down the line, by kind of developing kind of connections, I guess, that are kind of different, that complement your own network. I think that is something that has a lot of long-term benefits. And then I think one of the things I didn't fully appreciate as much, and if I would get back, I would spend more time on that now, is that there is certainly a process to entrepreneurship, in a sense, like that, and there over time things have been found out, well, what worked, what doesn't work, and there's some really great classes that kind of allow you to kind of develop kind of some frameworks, some processes around that. And I think, so the advice would be kind of really take full advantage of that, because kind of the more opportunity you have about experimenting, not just kind of learning them from a book, but actually experimenting with them in like Startup Garage, for instance, I think is going to be beneficial, whether your next step is entrepreneurship, as Rav was saying, or kind of launching your venture straight out of school, or later on. I think those things are truly helpful. Yeah, well, I will want to come back to that in a moment. You know, sort of the
the process and how you thought about learning that process at Stanford. But I do want to hear from let's say David and then Ravi, on this question, just in terms of advice you have or thinking about long-term, preparation as an entrepreneur. David, anything?
David?
Yeah, I mean, my advice, I think I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it was always to be deliberate. Take a look. It's so easy to arrive there and get swept up, and before you know it, half of the year is gone. So like, look at that awesome course list that Mike shared, and like try to figure out exactly what it is you want to get out of the year if you can, and then structure your classes and learning towards that. Because otherwise, you'll float along, and it's like it's only 1 year, and you'll get to the end, and you'll be like, oh no, I missed out on all these amazing opportunities. It sounds a bit doom and gloom, but I think you can turn it into something pretty exciting.
Robbie?
Yeah. So if I think the number one advantage is that you get to move to Silicon Valley. If you're not already here, then that's a big, it matters. It's all over, it's all around you. Entrepreneurship and the startup culture is all around you. And having moved to Silicon Valley, having moved to Stanford, the chances that you'll stay around here is also probably higher. So that's definitely a big advantage long term, because you now have created connections and you have some familiarity with the location here. And also long term, it's different people learn differently. When David and others were telling about, hey, you need to be intentional, I wasn't. It makes me feel that I need to go back to MSx once again. But it just, you almost learn out of osmosis, just being around, and it just, you keep learning, and the methodology of entrepreneurship, and how do you think about it critically, and most importantly, how do you manage people, and how do you talk to co-founders? It's not, once you're at Stanford, you pick up a certain way and certain language. It's not common around the world. That's not the way business is done. Even though when you're in Stanford, when you're in GSB, you have this, you are in a lens, you're in a fishbowl, you think that this is the way business is done all over the world, everywhere. This is how people talk to each other. That's not the case. So you definitely pick up a lot of soft skills as well that stay throughout your career.
Yeah, great. So, Mark mentioned essentially, entrepreneurship is a process. There's skills, there's a mindset, the way we think about it at Stanford certainly is influenced by the culture that we're in and the sort of Silicon Valley ecosystem, which Stanford has actually played a pretty significant role in fostering and developing over, several decades. But what would you say one or two key experiences that you had while you were at the GSB, helped you to develop your own process and build the skills? I don't know, was it, taking a class like Startup Garage, or was it just being immersed in the sort of the ecosystem of Silicon Valley? What would you highlight as something that you think, looking back now, you feel like that really helped solidify your sort of thinking as an entrepreneur? And I'll just whoever has something initially that they'd like to say, feel free to jump in on that.
Well, let me take a stab. So on the mindset part, or maybe to start with that, I remember kind of we had a presentation, or kind of, I forgot kind of how we call it, like a view from the top, from Vino Koshla, one of the kind of famous kind of VCs. And one of the things he said, which is still resonates with me today, is like, it's not kind of how many times you fail, it's kind of how many times you see, or kind of how you succeed. And as he talked about it, and one thing that stuck with me is that from an entrepreneurship point, it isn't about minimizing kind of your chances of failing as a company. It really is about like, hey, how do you think about the kind of a structured process for trying to prove a hypothesis you have about how this could be a really big opportunity and how you can have a big impact? And that kind of had a huge impact on me, because yeah, kind of you think about like, well, how do I minimize the chance of failure? Well, it's actually really doubling down on things that could be really big. Now, that mindset had a big impact on me, which is very different, I guess, before the GSB. Happy to talk to pros as well, but I'm curious to hear David and Ravi's view on these things as well.
Yeah, I can.
Go, Ravi, go.
Yeah. One thing I remember was during one of the classes in tech venture formation, I don't remember which VC it was. It was a smaller kind of micro VC that was coming in and giving a talk about, I think it was either how do you construct your pitch deck or term sheets and so on. But then at the end of the class, he was like, here's my email. I'm always, this is the size of the checks that I write. I'm always interested in listening and hearing about GSB startups. I made it very real. It's kind of made it like, okay, it's now on you and your team to come up with something that's worthwhile. The support from the institutional capital and micro VCs is there. So this was early in my my MSx term that I very distinctly remember. Sorry, David, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it was worth cutting me off. I was going to say, one of the experiences for me, which was pretty important, was I was in across the street class doing deep learning, and we had all these super bright Stanford computer science people, and not one of them could come up with a problem to solve. And I remember thinking at that time, if like people with all the experience of the MSx program could like walk across the street and grab these students, and we could do something all pretty powerful together. So that's kind of what I did. I think we've got all of this career experience and exposure to so many problems, and all of the technical resources are around there to kind of solve it at Stanford. So I found that very helpful and inspiring.
Yeah. There's a few questions that have been posed. One was about sourcing co-founders, and it sounds like a few of you have sourced co-founders in some of your ventures. It asks about basically, apart from just the domain expertise, does Stanford do anything, or did you learn anything in the process that allowed you to identify a good personal fit in terms of how you think about sourcing co-founders?
Yeah, I can start. It's definitely, they keep telling you when you are in MSx. I hadn't started a company before. I didn't know much about entrepreneurship, but they kept telling me finding your co-founder. It's like a marriage. It's you need to, the amount of time you spend with your co-founder, arguing and talking about different approaches, and it's so important to find the right fit upfront. And I understood a lot of that at that time, but I understand it and appreciate it much more now, 5 years on after the program, than I did at MSx. So that's one thing. The other thing I wanted to say was, across the street, there's just tread carefully, because there is always this impression of business school students just coming and picking off students, and just, I don't care who the student is, I just want 3 ML guys to work on my idea. That's the impression, for whether it's valid or not, that's the impression that the engineering students have. So take time to cultivate relationships, and find, even with machine learning co-founders or tech co-founders, find the time to kind of create a bond and create a fit, than just thinking of them as just this machine learning powerhouse that they can do any problem, right? So yeah, those are my 2 cents.
So you did find that. I mean, I've heard that stereotype from time to time. It's like the tech side is kind of a little wary of the business guys coming in and sort of swooping in. Did you was there anything that you got from the GSB, or sort of an approach you had to overcome that, or how much of it an issue did you find it actually for you personally, where and especially in the cutting edge technology, right? I mean, Stanford obviously is known for all sorts of, software and hardware ventures that have, had global impact. And so, to find those cutting edge, leading students in, computer science or whatever, AI, the cutting edge technology of the moment. I mean, they're in high demand, right? I mean, you're lucky to get someone who's really, a cutting edge thinker in that field, and they understand that.
Yeah, just to add one last thing there. Definitely, they have offers from all the big companies, and that no startup can match, and that's what they have to kind of weigh against. I think I found that taking a class with them and actually going through a process with them rather than just meeting them at like one of these team formation events and then expecting something to happen, than that taking a class with them like I think David did, and maybe not even you did that helps a lot.
Yeah. And I do want to just point out that, the GSB has many entrepreneurial classes that are open to non-GSB students. And in fact, the faculty require that teams mix between business school and other students at Stanford. And then there's classes you can take. I think Robbie mentioned tech venture formation and other classes that are available outside of the GSB at other schools. And you're going to find a very, very different student mix. And what I've heard over the years is that the experience as a GSB student can be quite different depending on whether you're taking a class at the GSB, where there's some students from outside the GSB, or taking a class in, say, the School of Engineering, where there's only a few students that are GSB students, or classes at the medical school. And you're going to develop a different network, and it's going to be a different experience. And you're also demonstrating something by taking classes outside of your sort of core area of interest. And so that's probably one way to sort of kind of close that gap. Anything that you'd add to that, Mark or David? And I've got one other question that I want to pose to the group.
Well, the one thing I would say, I guess, so I don't have kind of Stanford or GSB co-founders. I actually started as a single founder and then build a co-founding team of different experts with that. But this is really the key thing I would say, is that there is this unique opportunity being at Stanford, being at the GSB, to kind of develop relationships, and whether kind of they are kind of leading to an immediate kind of starting a company or something later on. I think it doesn't necessarily only need to be like, hey, you found this ML expert that wants to join you on the same mission, because that's not easy. Kind of finding somebody who kind of aligns with you on what you want to build, kind of despite kind of differences in skills that are complementary, kind of that's not easy. But the point is, kind of by looking beyond that, like maybe that person can help you connect to the right person that can be your co-founder down the line. And that's I definitely had that kind of benefit. For instance, people that I've met in the engineering school during my time actually helped me kind of better evaluate kind of other co-founders down the line as well. So yeah.
Great. So one other question that is asked, and I don't know, this may or may not be something that any of you have some thoughts about, but someone who's also interested in venture investment or becoming a venture capitalist, noted that in the electives list that I showed, there's plenty of classes there that are related to sort of the investing side of the entrepreneurship sort of ecosystem. Any thoughts on, the program is also a sort of a proving ground or opportunity to learn and sort of go into more of a venture or investing, angel, whatever it is, sort of side of entrepreneurship? I know, Mark, you spent some time kind of focused on that.
Yeah, definitely. So I would say yes, and I think I would kind of urge people to make sure you take classes both on the entrepreneurship side and the finance side, kind of appreciate kind of the two kind of, well, not two, but kind of one of the two main components of making that kind of ecosystem work. I did kind of a fair amount of angel investing myself, and actually some of the things that I learned to GSB were incredibly helpful to understand, like how to approach that, what works, what doesn't work. I think Ilya Strublia, struggling with names, my apologies, but one of the finance, yes, thank you. I think is now doing it, which wasn't there during my time, doing a great class around kind of angels investing, and kind of that's great. I think, yeah, I would also think like kind of the best VCs I have seen and the ones that I like to work with are actually the ones that have built companies themselves. So I think there's a little bit of that mix, in the sense of actually good investors probably tend to appreciate what it takes to do a kind of start a company. And they also appreciate that as a founder of most of the investors you speak to, you'll probably hear a no, and it's good to kind of learn why that is, and kind of appreciate that perspective from the financing side if you're an entrepreneur as well.
Yeah. Any thoughts on that, David or Robbie?
Not really. I mean, other than like most, I remember loads of my friends went into VC and they had various opportunities throughout the year to work with VC funds and get exposure to them. It seemed like they could, yeah, there was some direct relationship with the GSB and some venture funds, and the opportunities were there for them on a platter. And yeah, I would often pitch to them, and there was kind of a great relationship. But that's all I can add.
Yeah.
From my end, I think there are multiple professors who come from either, or they are either active VCs on top of being professors at GSB, or they come from a search fund background, or they come from impact investment background. So I didn't pursue venture investing or investing in general, but there's a lot of resources, including professors that you can get connected to and get more information about.
Yeah, great. There's a few questions that have been posed that really just have to do with support that you get through the GSB connections after graduation. And I think some of you have spoken to that in various ways. Mark, you said going to people with sort of technical expertise, based on your experience, connecting them with time you were at Stanford and other things as well. But do any of you formally kind of maintain connections through something like Stanford Angels and Entrepreneurs, or other GSB or Stanford affiliated alumni resources, sort of on a regular basis, or even just episodically, depending on a particular need that you have?
So maybe to add to that, I would say yes. We're part of Startup, which is great. I'm based in New York, and there's actually a really active kind of entrepreneurship group here as well that meets regularly, and it's a great way of kind of both connecting with investors, but also with other entrepreneurs. And actually, we also pitched at Stanford Angels and actually got some angel investors through that very early on as well, which has been incredibly helpful to kind of open up new doors, get access to expertise. So yeah, I think there were a lot of both structured as well as kind of unstructured, informal ways in which kind of, I guess, that happens. And the good thing is, because there is such an entrepreneurial spirit, and these groups tend to be kind of quite large, and they all have this mindset, at least the one I've experienced, is paying it forward, right? A lot of people have experienced the benefit of getting help from people that were ahead of them, and they're now trying to be helpful in the same way to others. And I think that's quite unique and exciting.
How about you, David?
It's more informal for me. I mean, I've got a lot of great friends, and a few months ago, I hadn't seen this person for ages, but I was pitching to a former GSB person who was now at a VC fund, and we went for a drink after. So you seem to run into people all the time, but I don't. It's more informal for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, same for me. It's informal. I refer to some videos every now and then. I refer to some class notes, managing growing enterprises or conversations in management. And also I'm part of a couple of Google groups, I think mail groups, one of the labs, I forget the exact name now, the Center for Entrepreneurial Studies has a lab at the corner of the GSB. They have like a Google group
that's the venture studio. Yeah.
Venture Studio, the Venture Studio Google group. There's always, it's good to stay connected with the kind of problems or the kind of things that other entrepreneurs are thinking about, and they share or they ask questions. So it keeps us in touch with what others are going through and so on.
And so last question, and we're going to wrap up here in a moment, but someone noted you have to invest a lot in your 1-year MSx program. How tough or easy is it to start up something right after graduating if you have a, huge loan to pay back, or financial considerations obviously are a factor. And I, sort of started with a little bit of context that people pursuing entrepreneurial ventures are less likely to get sort of a big salary or big compensation on the front end. Many people coming into the MSx program, they've got families, they've got they're not 25 years old, able to just sleep on a couch for long periods of time. How much of a factor is that in your sort of thinking about startups?
And that's very hard. And for me, that drove me to kind of try to get as much done during the year, because I knew that afterwards I would be dragging your statistics down because I'd be getting paid zero, and it had to survive. And so that's very difficult. And I don't have a great answer to that question. Luckily, I didn't have dependents, but I would encourage people to try and do as much as they could during the year, or have some sort of safety net, or even do it part-time until they get some traction. Otherwise, there are many different ways to do it, but otherwise it's really hard.
Yeah, I agree with David. It's kind of there's no one size fits all answer. I ended up doing exactly what he said. I did like a part-time product management gig at one of the companies as we were going through the accelerator, and once I felt I was getting money, more than that, once I felt that, okay, the startup needs full-time, I cannot do half-time anymore. I need to now, I'm in the phase of raising money, or I'm in the phase of trying to build a prototype, and it needs 100% of my effort. That's when I ended up quitting the company, the other product management company.
Yeah, I think maybe to add to that, I think it's a complex question, and there are a lot of things to kind of consider there, right? And I think what Ravi and David said, like kind of building up before you make kind of leaps, kind of that's kind of one way to go. I think the other way is, like, if you have an idea, like one of the good things is that there are opportunities to kind of raise pre-seed money fairly early on to give you some basis. And at the same time, there is this expectation alignment between investors and entrepreneurs that, yeah, you can't be paying yourself a 200K salary if you just raise 200K, because there needs to be this alignment for longer term kind of upside, right? And I think investors expect that as well. So yeah, it definitely comes with opportunity cost, but I've definitely not had a better job in my life before. So I think there are trade-offs to most decisions in life, I would say.
Yeah, so we're gonna close here. I want to thank you, all three of you, for giving a lot of responses. I do want to just know, because I've seen a lot of people come through the program over several years now, and it's natural. It's hard to come to a place like Stanford and not think about entrepreneurial opportunities, and probably the percentage of students that go through the program that at some point think, can I be the next whatever, Mark Zuckerberg, or Larry Page, or Sergey, or whatever, kind of create the next big thing. It's probably 90+%, right? Everybody has those thoughts at some point, sitting in the class and have some bright idea. But entrepreneurship's not for it's not a spectator sport. It's a very high contact, high risk, high reward, opportunity. I think the fact that people coming to the MSx program, just as a population in general, tends to be a group with a higher risk tolerance than your sort of normal everyday graduate student population. It's a disruptive experience to take a year off when you're sort of mid-career. The good news is, for someone who's thinking about entrepreneurship, is that I do believe the GSB community, probably second to none in the world, understands and has experience and has depth of knowledge and appreciation for both the challenges and the opportunities that come with entrepreneurship. And so as you're talking with potential investors and alumni that are experienced entrepreneurs, there's a high empathy factor in terms of what the challenges are, and they recognize that to be successful, everybody involved in a venture needs to be able to make it work. And so there is I've had experiences with other communities where people expect you to work for nothing, and I think at the GSB there's a recognition that, look, you got to pay your bills, you got to be able to get a healthy environment so that you can put as much focus as possible into creating a venture that's going to be long-term successful. So I've seen that over the years, but I also don't want to sugarcoat it. There's a reason that 30% of our students come in saying, yeah, I want to do something entrepreneurial, and at graduation it's closer to 15, 16, 17% that are actually prepared and jumping into something. Because a lot of people get to that stage and the idea they came in with, they spent a year and they realize that there's not the opportunity there that I thought, and we didn't actually spend much time talking about this, but I think sometimes that's the best possible outcome. When someone recognizes that rather than spend the next 3 years creating a hole that I'm going to dig myself into, I can identify that this is not the opportunity that I probably thought it was a year or so ago, and I need to do something else and maybe come back to entrepreneurship once I find another sort of lead into it. But that if you develop the mindset and the skills during the year, it prepares you so that when the opportunity is once you identify that opportunity, you're prepared to pursue it more effectively. But with that, I want to thank audience members for joining us today, giving us some great questions. I'll touch base with our panelists and make sure, see if they're okay with us sharing the recording, and I put our email address in the chat, so feel free to send us a message and we'll see if we can share the recording with you. So thanks, Mark, David, Ravi. I'm going to be at the GSB in about an hour or so. So if you're still around, maybe we can have a coffee. Otherwise, hope to catch up with each of you very shortly. All right. Thanks,
Mike.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Just apply.
Right.
Just
Thanks,
apply.
everybody.
It's the best. It's great. Do it.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.